Welcome back to the next episode of TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest, Alisha Remek, the VP for Construction and Engineering for AT&T. Did I get that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your insight on these important issues. We're going to focus this episode on the attacks on critical infrastructure, including the destruction of broadband networks and copper theft. We just came from a briefing on Capitol Hill in the visitor center, a packed room, listened to the impacts. I'd be interested in your take on what's the impact on AT&T from the attacks that you face on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so we are under attack. Definitely, it's a good way to describe it. We actually are having attacks relative to vandalism, theft of copper facilities and cables, obviously, and even other cards and things that have precious metals in them, just because the price of those types of precious metals is high. And there doesn't seem to be any indicator that the price of what you can sell those in the market is going to decline. So we've seen and continue to see a rise in these incidents. They're happening every day in our network. Of course, there's places that have much higher incident rates, like in Los Angeles, down in the Houston area, but we're definitely experiencing it nationwide. I think the biggest impact for us is the impact it has on our customers. That takes them out of service, and a lot of times they end up cutting not only copper cables but also our fiber facilities, because a lot of times they're on the same poles or they're in the same underground environment, and so they'll just start cutting away, and once they realize it's fiber, they'll just leave it there, which is interesting, because they'll start cutting it down and then they'll be like, oh, it's not copper, and just leave it spooled up on the ground and walk away. But definitely the impact to our customers is the most concerning to us. And then secondly, even the impact to our employees. Our employees, especially in our areas that are hardest hit, are very frustrated with the reoccurrence. They're seeing the same criminals repeating the acts. Even when they get arrested, they get released. And it's just not a safe environment for them, oftentimes in those types of conditions.
And on the consumer side, does it take a while to reestablish connection? It's not something you can do instantaneously.
Sure.
Some of it you can do it on the network side to know that it's an outage, but in many instances you're rolling trucks into
Absolutely.
potentially troubled neighborhoods and trying to reconnect consumers.
Definitely, and these outages take hours to restore. Some of them obviously are easier, some are much more complex. A lot of times when they'll go and cut long strands, for long periods, extended amount of footage, it's even more difficult, because then it's not just, hey, they cut a little piece, I probably have enough slack, I can put them back together. You have to replace, feet and feet of the cable, and that takes hours and hours, sometimes days. We unfortunately do have some outages, that have been out for extended periods of days, just due to the nature of having to buy additional cable, be able to splice it all back together, because copper, fiber is a kind of a plug and play technology, but copper is not, and you have to go splice every strand to put it back together.
And we're talking multiple cuts regularly happening to your business. What's the economic cost on, is this in the thousands or in the millions that you're facing?
In the millions, definitely in the millions. We're experiencing, I would say, about 1,000 incidents a month in our network. Is what we've kind of seen year to date. Definitely, more than double, almost triple what we were experiencing in the 2024 timeframe. So we've just seen it perpetually growing quarter over quarter as these incidents continue to happen. The frequency is more frequent. And again, yes, I think one of the things, we even talked about this a little bit earlier today, I think in the past it tended to happen in more rural areas, places that were more hidden, more wooded areas, where people weren't watching or couldn't easily see. And now, it is happening in downtown LA every single day and in broad daylight. There was an incident recently where some of the folks in my organization were actually in LA in the field. They were looking at some different scenarios going on because LA is such a hot spot for us for this, and they actually saw in broad daylight criminals cutting down cables while they watched from across the street. Because of course we're not going to go engage them. Called the police. Obviously the police showed up, were able to stop it from happening. We were able to recover the cables, but it's happening very frequently.
And what is the potential solution? What are the ideas that are out there? We've talked about new legislation at the federal level, at the state level. What would be really helpful to nip this in the bud, or to stop a major criminal activity?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly taking a multi-pronged approach, because there are things that we are trying to do to harden our network and then deter the criminals, right? Because there's more of them than there are police. It's not like we can lay eyes on every part of our network all day, every day. So we're doing a lot of our own investment just to harden the network, whether it's, we place trackers on cables that we can actively monitor. We are bolting manholes in an effort to deter, we're trying to make it harder, right, for it to happen. And we're even investing in off-duty police officers, round-the-clock surveillance, security guards, things like that to try to protect our network, because obviously we want to do that. And then we're partnering heavily with the local police and sheriff departments. That's really where we've seen kind of the most, whenever we see success as far as deterring the activity, is where we've really gone in. We've created and partnered with local police to create metal task force. Just really trying to lean in, helping them, so that we can bring the situation to them, make them aware, and then we can help them navigate as they're trying to react to it. Partnering with DAs. So, and in addition to that, obviously, legislation is really important. The more legislation we have against, a lot of states have come in and made it a felony, whereas it used to just be a misdemeanor. So we've had a lot of traction in a lot of states where it's a felony now. So there's, more consequences to the criminals that are apprehended. And then we've also had some traction with state legislation against the recyclers, right? So if they know that they're accepting stolen cables, they can get fined, they can have their licenses revoked. Even in California, a recent piece of legislation was passed where the police department can go to the recyclers and just at their own discretion to let me see your receipts, let me see the proof that you accepted these cables and it was legitimate, right? It wasn't stolen property. So a lot of the state level is really helping us gain that kind of traction on both the recycler side as well as the criminal side. And then as we talked about today, we're certainly very supportive of the bill that's kind of on the table right now relative to the federal aspect of what could be done with some federal legislation to support this.
And are you, it's an interesting dynamic where you have all of industry that has some aspect that is working together, and on the other side, there isn't any objection directly. It's just legislation takes time to move.
Sure.
There's inertia. There's lots of different things. But is it unusual to have AT&T working with everybody? So oftentimes it can be a competitive environment.
We're certainly competitors, definitely. Obviously, we want to grow our customers and serve our customers well. But this is certainly a situation and an issue that warrants that joint collaboration across both the providers, whether you're cable or, the traditional kind of telco type carriers like ourselves and Verizon, as well as even the new entrants, right? New fiber builders are experiencing this just because, again, these criminals don't know the difference between fiber and copper. So they're being impacted. They're not building copper networks, but their fiber networks are being impacted. And we're seeing more and more attacks even at our central offices, right? Where because they're, coming in and pulling cables and getting copper out of HVAC units, things that are inside the central office. We're seeing them vandalize at the bottom. If you've ever seen the bottom of a cell tower, that typically is fenced in or in some type of cage, but they're getting in there and taking out because there's fiber down there. And they're stealing that fiber as well. So we're seeing it across the board in all of our telecommunications infrastructure being attacked.
I guess my last question: what is the typical? I don't see "typical" is the wrong word, but who are these perpetrators? Are these solo activists? We've heard a lot from today that it's actually more organized.
Yeah. We believe it is more of an organized crime type approach. I mean, there are certainly aspects of individuals, or sometimes like two-man type crews. And there was a story actually that I just read yesterday of a couple, a man and a woman, that were arrested, and we were able to recover, 30,000 pounds of copper cable. So it's definitely a mixture, but with more and more engagement from the FBI, like we heard about today, they're able to trace back to more organized crime, and not just individuals. So I definitely think it's kind of all across the board, but there's money to be made, and unfortunately the criminals have figured that out.
Well, best wishes in your completed effort.
Thank you.
So thank you so very much for your time.
Absolutely, great to meet
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
So I want to further our conversation on the attacks on critical infrastructure, including destruction of broadband networks and theft of copper lines. My guest, the extension, is Jonathan Spalter, the president and CEO of USTelecom. Jonathan, thanks so much for your time.
It's really great to be here, Mike. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
We just came from an event on Capitol Hill. You hosted a panel, you moderated a panel of experts in the industry talking about this very issue. Perhaps I'd be interested in your take as someone who represents different companies in this space. What has been the impact from these attacks on critical infrastructure?
Well, they've been profound, and unfortunately I'd even say they've been pandemic. We've seen across the country, in literally every single service area, that we have deployed copper networks, often organized crime, not only harvesting these copper for ill-gotten gains, but as a result having second and third order effects that are really impacting communities, businesses, public safety. The damage that's being done to many of our local businesses whose coppers are cut and stripped can be measured in the tens of thousands of dollars for a few $100s that thieves might harvest from that copper. It's a very significant challenge, and we're only seeing it metastasizing.
What was your takeaway from the panel that you moderated?
Encouragement, but also resolution. What I was able to see today in the nation's capital, in Congress, was an all-hands-on-deck atmosphere, a bipartisan conviction that it is time that we collectively roll up our sleeves, whether we are in Congress with statutory work, in regulatory hallways with regulatory innovation, in law enforcement by providing stiffer not only enforcement but prosecution. But also, what I also was able to see and be very encouraged by is the deepening commitment by our network providers who are investing human capital, real capital, but also technology innovation, including in harvesting the new platforms, frontier models in AI, to address how we can geolocate where these attacks are happening and respond to them in closer to real time. It was really chilling. Literally while we were at our panel, one of our senior vice presidents for a major broadband provider who oversees network operations and construction was telling us he was getting texts in real time that there were 2 events of copper theft going on in his network that were disrupting 10,000 users. This is happening across the country, but we all now can be focused together on collective holistic solutions.
And it's not just copper, it's also fiber.
Yes.
Well, one thing that came from the panel that I was not surprised at, but it also came out, was the idea that thieves don't know the difference.
Right.
And in some instances, even if you label them, they don't care. They're going to take everything they get their hands on. Mm-hmm. What are one of the things that came out as well was the need to look at or address recyclers or the scrap metal industry. Do you think that has to be part of any kind of solution?
We have to be thinking about the entire value stack of individuals, organizations, and secondary market sellers that touch these ill-gotten copper assets. We need to think about making sure that resellers, that scrappers are held accountable for ensuring that we can know what is in fact legal commerce and what is illegal commerce. And we understand also that this is not new in history. Societies over centuries have dealt with copper theft. We need to harvest the best innovations, the best approaches, including about looking at this in a holistic way across the value chain to ensure that we're all in it together to come up with viable, practical, but near-term solutions.
One of the ideas is federal legislation. A bill has been introduced. Does it have chance, or what are the obstacles?
You know, unfortunately, there's more woe than giddy up these days in achieving actual victories of getting legislation into law. But what's unique about this issue is that copper is copper color. It's not red, it's not blue. This is a bipartisan coalition that is addressing these issues because everybody needs the connectivity that comes with America's communications networks. The good news is that we have viable, substantial, bipartisan coalescence around real legislation. We're seeing efforts in state jurisdictions. 22 states have advanced significant legislation to take deeper enforcement and cooperation and information sharing steps that can get us to solve this issue. But we're not yet done. We have to get this legislation over the finish line. I'm not holding my breath right now, given the fact that we are in the middle of a very contentious political and, importantly, election year. So a lot of the attention this summer will be on folks going home and getting their campaigns over the finish line. But when we come back in the fall, we're going to put our shoulder to the effort, and I know that many Congress people understand that this is a win not just for the country and our economy, but for their constituents.
Is this just happen to be one of the issues where all of industry is and all of those in good spirits are on one side, and you've got organized crime and individuals who perpetrate on the other side? This must be somewhat unusual for you to be all working together on some things.
If there was an advocacy issue that I enjoy the arithmetic on, it's this one. This is literally good versus evil. And there's nothing in between. There's no two sides to this issue. You are either going to be supporting making it easier for folks to steal this critical infrastructure, or you're going to be making it harder. We chose the latter choice. Everybody else has too. And we're looking ahead even more with more optimism that it's not just going to be going after those who are attacking our networks, but also coming up with more longer-term solutions, like, for example, allowing providers to more easily and quickly, efficiently retire these networks so that we can embrace an all-IP fiber future.
And one of the things that came out as well was and you referenced 22 states have been active on this issue. 13 have have enacted new legislation into law to help tackle this particular issue, whether it's heightening the penalties or some aspect of that. Is this also one of those areas where it's good to be working together with states? Sometimes I haven't always worked with states, and this is a unique issue that's put forward.
We're finding that attorneys generals, we're finding state public utility commissions, governors, legislatures are all aligned to believe that we can work together across not only state lines but across political divisions to get practical, earnest steps taken to address this issue. Without that level of comity, we are not going to succeed. And this is truly one of the very first issues I've been able to really fully embrace. Our community of broadband providers have been able to fully embrace, where there just is no daylight between the folks that we're working with in the states, localities, municipalities, down to the smallest political organizational levels that don't see eye to eye on this issue.
You referenced this early on. If for some reason you're not able to get this across the threshold before the next Congress, there's a loss of opportunity, right? You have to restart the effort, and the window lengthens. That during that time period, we're going to see more incidents, and am I wrong in saying we're going to see greater loss of economic to deployment for providers, and then the hit on consumers?
Yes.
The consumers have to face the fact. One of the issues that came out really clear was on emergency communications, the impact on whether it be, we can hear sirens in the background right now, or it also be military bases, airports, and other things. Is that part of the exposure of this issue?
It certainly is, and it also provides, I think, an opportunity because it focuses the mind, but it also focuses political attention on the reality that there's a direct correlation, potentially even causation, between political delay in getting either legislation, statute, or other regulatory mechanisms, or even administrative efforts to attack the problem, with extending the lifeline and therefore the incidence of this problem. And because so many of our copper networks still are adjacent to so many of our critical infrastructure facilities, our public safety facilities, our military and national security installations, that unless we address this urgently, earnestly, and practically now, we're going to see, unfortunately, continued occurrences of potential disruptions of service and economic harm and economic costs in places where we want to see it the least.
And it seems that if we can't, and the issue that came through was, if you can't get it to a felony level, you can't get prosecutors to really put their arms around this, to really tackle the issue. And so, if I'm correct, and please expound upon this, we heard a number of stories on how perpetrators were being arrested multiple times and would just get out and do the same thing again.
Yeah. There are some, I think, very thoughtful approaches to thinking about how we need to ratchet up the way that we've been prosecuting these crimes and enforcement in general, including potentially federalizing this particular kind of theft, dealing with recidivism as an amplification of penalties, but also considering thoughtfully, making sure that there's going to be disincentives deeply etched in our criminal code to doing this kind of conduct. We only have to look back to ancient Egypt to see the kind of penalties that they extracted against the grave robbers who were actually after copper objects. We don't necessarily have to go back to those levels of extremity because they were pretty horrible, but there are important steps that we need to take to align and create harmonization amongst and between states in terms of their application of relevant law and enforcement of those laws against copper thieves, but also at the federal level.
What has been the receptivity from the recycler/scrap industry? I was in Washington State, had a chance to talk to a number of providers there that were facing this issue, and there they actually had state law that addresses the recyclers and the obligation on their end. Does that has to be part of the equation?
Yeah, the good news is that it is not the first time that I think the recycling industry in the United States, which by the way is a multi-billion-dollar industry and it's very important to the continuation of a viable supply chain in this nation, has had to deal with criminal culpability and liability for transacting in ill-gotten goods. So they have familiarity with the rules of the road, but what we need to do is to stiffen at least the smaller portion of those recyclers that are not being as vigilant as they need to.
Last question, I promise. One thing that came through was that there is some reluctance. There's some reluctance to add new criminal penalties on Congress in general, right? That we've heightened up criminal penalties on so much, and therefore, there is a view from some in Congress that maybe more criminal penalties isn't the solution. But in this instance, is there anything else that would be as dramatic and as impactful?
I understand that there is that reluctance. I think it's born of consequences of an earlier era of the imposition of criminal laws, like 3 strikes and you're out, and its consequences that still, I think, create disincentives for understanding that you can use criminal law as a lever to deal with these types of issues. We believe you can. But I do think that there are deeper policy possibilities, and I mentioned one of them, which is if we can build on the work that this FCC has been doing to allow our broadband providers across the country to more efficiently and quickly retire copper networks so that we can transit our communities that we're serving to all IP fiber-based broadband. That is one important and I think meaningful step that we can take by literally taking the football away from the criminals.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Great to see you, Mike.